Welcome to this recap of a call we had a couple weeks ago with the Jazz Circle members, Zoom call, on how to practice more effectively. And like I did the last time we had a discussion, I just wanted to make a studio version of this that's going to be quicker, more efficient, to the point, and make the best use of your time that I can. So I started the talk with saying practice doesn't make perfect, as the old saying goes. Practice makes permanent. And you've probably heard that before, but it really is true. If you practice the wrong things over and over and over, they're going to be ingrained in you, and that is how you're going to sound, for good or for bad. So the purpose of kind of this talk and everything I say about practicing, and everything else about music, I guess, is about hearing deeper. Hearing your practicing and all of the elements that come with your practicing deeper. So that you can actually hear what you sound like as opposed to the fantasy of what you sound like. And we all go through that. You know, I think there's a chip in us that make us believe we sound better than we actually do. And one of the questions that someone asked in our call was, should I record? Well, and my answer was absolutely yes, record. Record as much as you can, because that gives you a step closer to the objective sound that you produce. And even better than that, you know, if you practice, put it away for a day. Don't listen right after you record it, because you're still going to be in that kind of euphoric state of how wonderful you sounded. Put it away for a day, and then bring it out and play it. And maybe develop a mental attitude when you listen to it as to, this is someone you don't particularly like, so you're looking for flaws. Now, I'm not saying all you do is look for mistakes, because your self-esteem as a musician depends on you believing that you do a lot of things well. So listen to those as you hear your recording, but don't skip over the flaws, because those are the things you're going to work on to improve. And the good things you hear, you're going to work on those to enjoy the act of playing and performing and recording. But it comes down to hearing yourself more deeply. And whenever I coach someone with their playing, I'll say to them, give me a sample of something you practice. And they'll play through something, and maybe I'll ask for something else, and they'll play through something else. And then at the end, I'll say, so what do you hear? And a lot of times they give me a kind of a surprised look by, what do you mean what I hear? Aren't you supposed to be the one telling me what you hear, and then I'll just work on what you hear? But I don't think that's good teaching, because, it's kind of like feed a fish or teach a man to fish. I want to teach you to practice, and a fundamental aspect of that is helping you hear more deeply what you actually sound like. So I'll ask, what do you hear? And most of the time, I'll get kind of like, I don't know, I think that sounded pretty good. And I'll push them a little bit further and say, come on, was there anything in there that you would have liked to have improved? All right, now we're getting somewhere. Now they have, well, yeah, I could have done this, I could have done this, I could have done that. But it shows me that it's not someone's first impulse when they practice. The first impulse often is just, I'm going to play these etudes, I'm going to run my scales, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to call it a day, and I've practiced. But I don't think that's practicing, at least optimally. I think what we want to do is practice that etude, but as we're playing it, listen deeply to what we're actually sounding like. What is the tone? How is the articulation? Is it consistent if it needs to be? Are the staccatos the way they should be or you want them to be? Are the legatos? For a trombone player, I'll say, play the first phrase of the Rochou number 1. Goes like, just those simple notes. And then I'm asking them to listen for the smoothness and consistency of the articulation, the smoothness of the tone. And once they put a microscope under that, then I'm kind of providing them, they start to hear it. And sometimes they're a little embarrassed. It's like, oh shit, I sound like that. And so we work on it. And I'm reminded of a clip that of my interview with Ron Carter. And we talked about practicing, and he had a concept that I've embraced called practicing to perfection. Here's Ron Carter talking about that.
So I had the bass in my hands, and I was practicing. I said, wait, let me call my student. So I called him up. I said, are you busy right now? He said, I'll call you back in 10 minutes. And he did. He said, this is what I'm practicing. And it was a C major scale until it got perfect. And I trusted he would hear what perfect means after all my lessons with him. I was trying to play that 8 times in a row. And if anything was wrong, if I missed a note or I did a double string or one note was just a little bit uneven in the note length, I was back to the count of 1 again. And so however long that took for this practice sample, 20 minutes or so, I said, no, this is what I'm doing to get better. You can't do any less than that. And so, and then we parted friendly, I think. And so when I finished that, I went back to what I was practicing for. I was trying to get the Bach suites back into my fingertips. And not having played that with any really intent for a very long time, 7 months, 8 months or so. This routine I had just figured out to do C major scale until it was perfect, kind of adjusted my hands physically to what I was asking them to do all over again. So for those bass players who are listening, I'm not practicing bebop melodies, I'm not practicing bass lines, I'm practicing what I call skill etudes to help me find the notes I hear when I need to find them.
When most people think of Ron Carter or any superstar jazz musician, and they think about if they practice and what they practice, they're thinking they're practicing fast scales, they're playing complicated tunes, they're practicing weird scales and running weird chords, and they're doing all sorts of wild and wonderful things. But here's a guy, typically with nothing to prove about his playing, he's focusing on a C major scale and making sure that every note is perfect. And if it's not, he goes back. And I think there's a super valuable lesson for all of us in that how well are you practicing? How well are you hearing what you're practicing so that you can improve on it rather than just repeat all the mistakes? We can play a C major scale. We can run it up and down and up and down and up and down and do it 15 times and say, okay, well, I'm done with that. Now let's play the G major scale or whatever your progression is. So what I really want to talk about is listening to yourself more effectively. And in the Jazz Circle membership, you have access to a platform called Groove's Playground. And I highly recommend Groove's Playground in a way for the same reasons, because these are play-along tracks that are not complicated. In fact, they only have 1, 2, 3, or at most 4 chords that loop. And the reason I put that together is because I want you to be able to forget about the complications of what scale to play over the chords and what chord is coming next and what's the form and what's the bridge and how do I play the bridge and all of this stuff. And instead, I just want you to hear yourself and be able to emote over these very simple harmonic beds. And if you can forget about the changes, and you can forget about the scales, and you can forget about the complex form and all of that stuff, you have a better shot at being able to really hear yourself, to listen, and to be able to listen to what's inside you so that it might come out of your instrument. So check out Groove's Playground. I think that's an important tool to doing this. Now, we're talking about focus. How well are you focused on the tones of the C major scale or the first phrase of the Rochu? How well are you focused? And I had an interesting experience that I shared on the live talk, which is I've always been an aquarium buff, right, from way back, and I just upgraded my aquarium. I've got now a 60-gallon hexagonal aquarium. There it is. And what they call a hardscape decoration in it is white quartz. And where I practice, I climb up a hill and I practice every couple of days. And it's full of white and other colors, but white quartz. And I love the look of it. So one day when I got done practicing, I came down the mountain, I got my backpack on, and I came back up and I started to pick out the various pieces that that caught my eye. I was looking for big pieces and a lot of small pieces and pebbles. And what I noticed after the next time I went up, a day or two afterwards, all I could see was white quartz. There's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. My focus was so concentrated on finding that color of that material that's all I could see. It's kind of like when you're looking for a new car and you kind of settle on one, all of a sudden you start picking them out where you wouldn't normally have picked them out. And I think it's because we've trained our brain to be focused on a particular thing. So in this case, what I'm asking you instead of white quartz is to focus on, let's say, your articulation, your legato articulation. Focus on your tone and the difference in tone as you go up and as you go down. And I think what you'll find is if you really focus on one aspect at a time, I think you're going to start to hear things that you hadn't ever heard before. And that goes for whether it's a major scale or whether you're playing over autumn leaves or whatever you happen to be doing. I think it comes down to a focus. And by the way, that focus on quartz still hasn't left. I mean, it's been 2 weeks since I did that, since I set up the new tank. Every time I go up there, I'm like, oh, there's more gray quartz I got to look at. There's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. It's really amazing what happens when you train your focus. So that's a big lesson that I want to impart to you is choose something you're going to focus on, record it to help with your focus. Like I could have recorded video of me going up and afterwards going, oh, there's one I missed, there's one I missed. Oh, it's all over the place, all this quartz. I want you to be able to do that with your playing. Now, as a member of the Jazz Circle, you have access to my AI. And I'm going to give you a demonstration of something it can help you with, and we're going to relate this to practicing. So I asked the question, give me the most important 3 tips for practicing more effectively. And it gave me 3 great tips. Now, I could have asked for 5, I could have probably asked for 10, but let's start with 3, because I think they were really good what it came up with. So the tip number 1 is to practice without music. And I've done videos on this, I've written blog posts on this. When I talk about going up the mountain looking for quartz, I'm not bringing a music stand with me. I do much, I don't know if it's half, but much of my practicing without any music. Because all I want to do, I'm up there on the hill, I'm playing out into the desert. As far as I know, no one can hear me, and I can play as loud as I want, which if you're a trombone player, loud is always better. And I have a warm-up routine with, the normal trombone warm-up routine to get my chops together. And then I go into various things that I may need to work on. Now, there are categories like training my ear. So if there's a tune I'm learning right now, I'll play that, and then I'll start in another note and another note and another note. And that's very important to me that if I'm going to claim to know a tune, I have to be able to start that tune on any note, barring a note that puts me way out of upper or lower register. But I have to be able to hear the tune well enough to do that. And that's a big part of what I practice. And then knowing the key that the tune is likely in, I'll be playing, improvising in those keys. I'll be improvising over the changes that I hear in my head. And if we're talking about going back to the last group call we had, when we talk about how to learn a tune, part of learning a tune is being able to hear the harmony in your head so well that you can play through the changes without hearing them externally. You hear them internally. So I'll practice that. I will certainly practice my scales. I'll practice my arpeggios. I'll practice playing whole tone scales, minor third arpeggios, major third arpeggios, fourths. All the while, I'm deeply listening to what this sounds like. I'm listening to the intervals. I'm not, if I'm going to do, let's say, our major third arpeggios, I'm not thinking about which note comes next, which note comes next. I'm listening for if that augmented triad up and up and up sounds correct. And of course, I'll start in different notes. I'll do tonguing exercises, and we all have, depending on your instrument, and I probably should have said this at the beginning, your practicing is going to vary. Trombone players, we have a limit, brass players, I should say, we have a limited amount of time to practice. Even if we break it up throughout the day, our chops are only going to hold up so long. If you're a piano player, God bless you, you can practice 10 hours a day and keep it together with your chops. So you have the ability to expand the things you practice every day if you're in that regimen as a pro player or a student or whatever you find yourself in. So as a brass player, we're limited. So, I have my certain buckets of things that I practice, but again, without music. So I'm up there and I'm playing tunes, or I'm remembering certain big band lead parts that stretch my range, and I'll play those, in different keys. I'll think of transcriptions, solo transcriptions that I'll play, and I'll play those in different keys. So again, I'm without music, stretching my hearing, and of course it's a beautiful thing for a brass player to be playing out in the middle of nowhere, because I can, it really does force me to project and really focus on the tone. For an alto trombone player, I have a pretty big tone, and I think part of it is because I'm out there doing this type of practicing. So that's practicing without music. And I think if you're not used to that, if your routine is to get out the music and open to page 27 and play that, what I would suggest is take a day and put the music aside and just see what can come up for you to practice. And by the way, without watching the music, maybe it allows you to focus more on what you're hearing. That's an interesting point. So put the music aside for a day and see how effectively you can practice and where that takes you. And it probably will take you into some new areas that are fun and beneficial for you to play. Okay. The second tip the Jazz Chat gave me was to use constraint exercises. Now, I have lessons on constraint exercises in both pocket jazz and improvisation savvy. When you're playing jazz, you're standing up, you're playing a solo, there are so many things that have to coordinate and go right. Again, if you're a brass player, your breathing, your fingers or your arm, your tone, your articulation, getting the tongue in the right place. And we haven't even started on playing the right notes or the right rhythms or, whatever right means for you. There's so many things to think about. And then when we do get to the notes, we have to think about, what articulation, what rhythms, are there rests? Do we stop? Do we not? Where, all these things we're thinking about. And the constraint exercises is the ability to put some of those things aside. So let's say that we want to play, and by the way, that's a big point of Groove's Playground, right? What have I constrained in Groove's Playground? I've constrained the form of a tune, the bridge of a tune, any more than 1, 2, 3, or 4 chords. That's a lot of constraint. But even with that said, there's still all the rhythms you could play and all the notes you can play and the high range and how short the notes are and how long the notes are. So maybe within Groove's Playground, you constrain yourself further and say, all I'm going to play are the common tones, by the way, that I give you for each groove. Common tones are, no matter what the changes are, I'm giving you notes that work through the entire loop. So you could play those 2, 3, sometimes 4 notes and sound great through the whole loop. Well, maybe that's your first constraint exercise. Just play those notes. Doesn't matter what rhythm. Maybe you want to constrain the rhythm. Maybe you only want to play those notes as half notes, just to kind of really hear what they sound like over those changes or over those that loop. Maybe you can constrain the range that you play in. Because again, range is, there's so much we can do with that. So the point of constraint exercises is to reduce the complication of the things you're practicing. With Ron Carter, he could have said, I'm practicing a diminished whole tone scale. No, he constrained that to just the most basic major scale possible, the C major scale. And he didn't just go ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba. He's playing each one very deliberately, so he's constraining the speed. When I talk about practicing Rochu for you trombone players, that first phrase of Rochu, that first 6 notes, right? You're constraining most of the entire etude, and you're constraining having to breathe in certain right places. All it is take a breath, play 6 notes. So constraint exercises is a way for you to slowing down, by the way, is constraint. You're slowing the speed. But to slow down and deliberately pick out things that are complicating what you're doing so that you can get to the root of the problem. And if I were to add a 4th category here, I know we haven't gotten to 3, but the 4th category would be to be able to get good at getting to the root problem. And that's part of the constraint exercise as well, because so let's say you're having trouble with tonguing through 8th notes at a certain speed in your improvisation. Now you could just bang it out, bang it out, and bang it out until you finally get better. Maybe that'll work. Or what you could do is say, well, what is the real problem here for a brass player or a woodwind player? Is it my tonguing? I don't know. Am I taking in enough air? Well, let's take those things apart and let's measure it. So for a brass instrument, I would say let's work on our breathing for various exercises and get our core strengthened. Did that help? No. Okay. Well, let's constrain the amount of the specific notes we play, and let's practice just on one note. And let's constrain the speed and let's bring it down just to the point where we can consistently articulate those 8 notes at a certain speed. Now let's bring it up. Bring it up. Now I know that you probably do these things, certain of these things, and I'm just trying to give you a label of it and give you an expansive view of what constraining actually means. It means stripping away all the excess to get to the root or to get to the fundamental that you can do well and then building on that. So those are constraint exercises. And the other interesting thing that the chat gave was about finding your unique voice. And I think the point of that is, and that's a huge topic for me, and I don't normally associate it with practicing, but I think it does make sense, because in listening to yourself, are you trying to sound like someone else? Can you hear the you in your playing? Are you hearing your voice? Are you hearing the music that kind of you fantasize when you think of playing? Are you hearing that? Or are you hearing trying to play like Woody Shaw? Are you trying to play like Miles? Are you trying to play like someone else in your local market that's a great player? How well do you know your unique musical voice? So if I said to you, what is unique about your playing from anybody else? So in other words, if I heard a recording of you and I heard a recording of 5 other people, would I be able to pick you out quickly? So the first step is to know your unique musical voice and what that sounds like, or what you want it to sound like if you're young and you're still kind of figuring that out. And then to be able to be aware of that while you play. When you practice over a tune, or when you're out playing with your band or your friends, are you really listening internally to playing who you are? It's like if you're speaking to people, are you trying to sound like someone else? Or is your speaking cadence and tone and articulation and timing uniquely yours? So those are 3 tips from Jazz Chat. And as a member of the Jazz Circle, I strongly recommend going into Jazz Chat and just asking it questions. And it won't always know the answer because it is limited by all my books, my blog posts, my lessons, my interviews. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there. It's like a couple million words, but it's not the entirety of human knowledge. But it is very specialized to give you what I think is great advice. And if you get stuck on something, you can ask it questions like to practice more effectively. And then when it lists constraint exercises, maybe you say, give me 1,000 words on how to best use constraint exercises. So you can drill down on the answers that it gives you. So I think that pretty much covers most of the big things that I talked about in the live session. And as always, ask me questions. If you've ever asked me for advice, you know that I'm not stingy with my advice. You might find it turned into a blog post. You might find it turned into a video. I'm here to help. My products and musicsavvy.com are here to help. So hopefully this gave you some things to practice, and go apply some of them and see what happens. Thanks.